Praise Yahweh, everybody. Man, before we get started this morning in our Sabbath school, could we have scripture from Sister Whitney and prayer from Mother Tina?
Happy Sabbath. I'll be reading Isaiah chapter 30, verse 1. Woe to the rebellious children, says Yahweh, who take counsel, but not from me, who pour out libations to the gods, alone, but not by my spirit, so they may add sin to sin. I have read Isaiah chapter 30, verses 1. May Yahweh add a blessing to the readers, hearers, and doers of his holy word for the edification of our soul.
Hallelujah.
Happy Sabbath, everyone.
Happy Sabbath.
Our Father, which art in heaven, hallowed is thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done in earth as it is in heaven. Father Yahweh, we give honor and thanks for you on your Sabbath morning. We thank you for allowing us to step in to your place of holiness. We thank you for our senior bishop for his health, life, and his strength. We give all honor and glory because of him. On your Sabbath day, we are able to be here giving all needs that comes in your honor. We thank for the ones that's on their way. We thank for the healings of the ones that's being healed. We thank you for the ones that's being saved. We thank you all day for your Sabbath day. And in your son Yahshua's name we do pray. Hallelujah.
Hallelujah. Thank you for that beautiful scripture and beautiful prayer. Before I get started, of course, first and foremost, give honor to the leader of this house, Senior Bishop Dr. Herman H. Davis, for trusting me enough and to bring a word and stand before his people, not just in person, but as well representing his holy kingdom and on Facebook. I do not take it lightly at all. Um, this week's this week we're gonna continue on from last week's Sabbath school lesson, which was in the book of First Chronicles, the 21st chapter, which is in, if you have the older version of the book of Yahweh, it is page 344. And just a brief recap of what we talked about last week. So, the message is beware of Satan's glory. And basically, what we talked about last week was we went into the story of how David numbered Israel. He took a census out on Israel. As we all know, that David is the king of Israel. He is the ruler. He is the chief prelate, basically, over Israel, the army. And they have been having bouts basically where they've been, you could say, undefeated in wars. They've gone to neighboring nations and they've taken them over and they've won. And David has let this thing get to him in a. He's basically sin. He's let that get to his head and he's got puffed up and he's got prideful. He stopped looking and leaning on Yahweh and he started to look at these wins as they were his wins. And in our side note, where this is where the topic came from, it says that David was tempted because Satan had set her before his eyes her excellency and her glory, which is where the topic came from. Beware of Satan's glory. And we had talked about how David was incited by Satan, and because Satan stood up against Israel. And we also talked about how Satan only did that because Yahweh allowed Satan to do it. And we talked about how that, just like in the book of Job, that's how Yahweh does things to test us and see where we are. Because, well, as we all know, David is the one who said that he was the apple of Yahweh's eye. So, as we all know, that we going to have to be tested on saying those things. You can't just make statements like that and not think that you're not going to be tested. We here in this temple, this holy great kingdom, you say I'm a commandment keeper, I'm sold out for Yahweh. You should know that Satan is going to hear that. Not just Yahweh, but Satan going to hear. Yahweh going to hear it, and then Satan is going to say, okay, let me test him. And Yahweh is going to he's going to permit it to happen. And that's when you're going to get tested to see whether you're going to do as David did here, and you're going to let Satan incite you, or if you're going to stand firm in what you had said. That's basically what we talked about last week, is David numbering Israel, and we stopped at I believe the 7th or 8th verse, but I'm gonna pick back up at the 5th verse. So the 5th verse, First Chronicles, the 21st chapter, on page 344. It says, Ahab reported the total number of the people to David. All Israel had 1,100,000 men capable of drawing the sword, including Yada, who had 470,000 men. So where we picking back up, this is where Ahab, which is David's, is in natural is his nephew, is also the commander of his army as well. So he's like, David goes to him whenever things need to be basically we gonna go to this nation and we gonna take over. So Ahab is the one that he sends out. So Ahab and some other elders were sent out to do this, to report the number back to David. The 6th verse says, but he did not include Levi and Benjamin in the census because the king's command was repulsive to him. If you remember last time we talked about in the 3rd verse, Ahab came back and combated David when David told him to go take a census out on the people, and he basically said, why should we bring guilt upon Israel by doing this thing? So in the 6th verse it says that he left 2 tribes out because he knew what David was doing was going to bring a great punishment from Yahweh, and they was going to receive Yahweh's wrath. So he left out 2. He didn't even count everybody because he said that it was repulsive to him, meaning it was a disgust to him. He didn't even want to do it at all. And the 7th verse says, Yahweh was displeased by this thing, so he punished Israel. And what came to my mind was, it started off, this let me know how important it is that leaders really, really are connected to Yahweh. Because the very first verse started off by saying that Satan stood up against Israel by inciting David. And then here it says that Yahweh was upset with David, so he punished Israel. So that should let you know right there, leaders, how important a role is, that when you do wrong, just know that the people are going to be punished. And in my study, and it also said that when David had sent out to count the people, it also brought the people of Israel began to get prideful too. So David's pride just trickled down, and they became prideful too, because it's like, okay, the king is looking at me like this, like the king needs me too. I play a vital role in this army. So David's sin is doing nothing but trickling down, and is getting Israel engulfed in this as well. The 8th verse says, then David said to Yahweh, I have sinned greatly because I have done this thing, but now I pray, forgive the transgression of your servant, for I have behaved very foolishly. And as we talked about last time, First Chronicles and as well as 2 Samuel, they are chapters that are like mirrored after each other, kind of like how like the 4 Gospels in the New Testament are. It's like different accounts from different people, but they mirrored after each other. And in 2 Samuel, the 24th chapter, which is the mirroring chapter, it was saying that David, literally after Ahab came and gave him the number of people that Israel had, David immediately his conscience got to him. Right after he received the number, it said that his conscience got to him. And then that's when it said that he went and he prayed and asked Yahweh for forgiveness. Basically went to him and was like, I don't even know why I did this thing. And remember, it said that last week we talked about, it said that it took almost 10 months for Ahab and the people to completely count all of the people. So that's almost 10 months that David had to sit to himself and think, okay, he's been prideful for almost 10 months, basically. And it wasn't until that thing smacked him right in his face that he was like, okay, I'm wrong. And that's a vital part that we need to realize in our lives. because there are some people who do wrong and they stand on that wrong. But we need to realize that once we do wrong, the Holy Spirit should instantly hit in us, and we should realize, what am I doing? There's many a times that I may even be in conversation. Somebody may be doing something, and I may be getting upset, and it's something instantly that just snapping. And they be like, "Shut up." And you can basically say David had that moment to his face where he was like, "Yahweh, what am I doing?" But the thing about Yahweh is, where David messed up is he already did it. So, and Yahweh's not going to let this go unpunished, because it already said that Yahweh was displeased, so he punished Israel. The 9th verse, this is where I'm really going to pick back up, because I think this is where we actually left off last time. The 9th verse says, Yahweh spoke to Gad, the seer of David, saying, and I really, I stopped it there, because what stuck out to me is when it said Yahweh spoke to Gad. Now, if we remember when we heard the story of what David did to Bathsheba and her husband when he sent out to kill her husband and take Bathsheba as his wife, remember who came to him? It was Nathan, the prophet Nathan, that came to David when he did wrong. So now this time Yahweh is speaking to Gad, and it says that Gad is the seer. So when I looked up the metaphysical definition of what a seer was, seers, literally it says that seers represented, it basically means sees with spiritual eyes. So you had prophets and you had seers. They were basically hand in hand, the same thing, but the only difference was with prophets is prophets went out into the field to teach the law and to teach the spiritual and were connected with Yahweh. The seers were mainly people who were brought, it said that seers, the kings and people in power always had prophets and seers in their midst, because most of those people weren't holy men. So they wanted holy men in their midst to counsel. They needed counsel from Yahweh, so they kept seers, which is who Gad was. So just some information that I looked up on Gad, some history on Gad. It says Gad was a seer / prophet who David kept in his counsel. Gad was an honorable man and faithfully spoke Yahweh's word to David. Gad played a crucial role in David's success as king. He first came into play when David was on the run from King Saul, and he was the one who advised David to leave Moab and return to Judah. This advice allowed David to build up a reputation as a mighty warrior, making him popular with the people. So David kept prophets and seers in his counsel to advise, rebuke, encourage, and to warn him. Because Gad was faithful to his calling, David had the spiritual insights that he needed to fulfill the role that Yahweh had called him for. And that made me think about us. It just made me thankful because we have a Gad in our midst. It said that because Gad was faithful to his calling, David had the spiritual insights that he needed to fulfill. So our leader, we all know, is faithful to his calling. So we should count it a blessing that we have somebody who is faithful to their calling, that, as it says here, incites us, the insights that we need to fulfill the role that Yahweh called us for. And that made me think, you literally cannot bypass the leader. You just can't. I don't care what you think you're going to do. You can read this word from front to back, all the meditation, all of the praying that you want. But if you think you're going to bypass the leader, it's just not going to happen. That is just not the way Yahweh operates. Look at David. David himself said, I am the apple of Yahweh's eye. However, in every moment that we look up, it was the spiritual men that David kept around that made him, basically, you going to live up to that. If you say you're the apple of Yahweh's eye, I'm going to make sure you live up to that. Whether, as it says here, whether it's to advise you, rebuke you, encourage you, or to warn you. And I don't know about any of y'all, but literally every aspect of that is our senior bishop. I've been advised by Bishop. I've been rebuked. I've been encouraged. And I've been warned countless times by our leader. And it just made me think even more how important it is that we have a Gad or a prophet or a seer in our midst. Is even when I think about it spiritually, and I don't have no mind saying this, when people say Yahweh spoke to me, he said this to me, Whenever I know Yahweh is communicating to me, I hear Bishop's voice. And out of respect, this is what I hear. I hear the voice of Herman. I don't hear my voice. That's how I know. When I have certain dreams and Bishop is there, sometimes I have dreams and Bishop's not even speaking. I'm like, okay, Yahweh is here somewhere in the midst because my leader has came. I put, David cannot declare himself as the apple of Yahweh's eye without a Gad in his presence, and neither do we. Gad worked in harmony with Nathan the prophet, who Nathan is the one who came and warned and rebuked David the first time when what he did with Bathsheba. Remember, it said that Yahweh spoke to Nathan to go rebuke David. So it says here that Gad and Nathan were actually like tight when it came to working with David. It says they work in harmony, meaning they were in one. David, you couldn't have Gad go and rebuke and Nathan be on David's side. They both had to be one in one. But the only way that was going to happen is because they were both in harmony with Yahweh. It says Gad worked in harmony with Nathan the prophet, who Yahweh had sent to rebuke David when he killed Bathsheba's husband. And just off of this 9th verse, when it said Yahweh spoke to Gad, the seer of David, I wrote down here that we need a Gad and not a Ahab in our midst. So as we can see here in this chapter, remember Ahab did combat David when David made the request and was like, go count the people. And Ahab was like, why do you want to do this? You're going to bring turmoil against Israel. But in the 4th verse, remember, it said, nevertheless, the king's word overruled the admonition of Ahab. David was not going to overrule Gad. That's why I said we need to have a Gad and not a Ahab. Because if we start hanging around more Ahabs, we're going to have people who are basically people pleasers, who going to do. And it made me think about people who say they always, this is my friend, because they go along with what you want, because they go along with what you say. And it made me think, is that really your friend, or are you really just bullying them? Most people don't have friends. You just hanging around them because they're going to say yes. They're not going to stop you. They may say, Dan, do you think that's a good idea? And because us as people, we like to rear up and show our hand. As I said, the king word overruled. That king that's sitting in us like to stand up, and we think we're bigger and badder than what it is, and people just go along to get along. But Gad wasn't sent for that. Gad was literally sent to rebuke him. So it says, Yahweh spoke to Gad, the seer of David, saying, the 10th verse, go and tell David, saying, this is what Yahweh says. I offer you 3 alternatives. Choose one of them for yourself, so I may do it to you. And I thought that was something because, first of all, Yahweh, he's so tough. He said, I'm going to let you choose your punishment. And that made me sit and think, what came to my mind is, because last time we was talking about how fatherly Yahweh is to us. It really is like a father and child relationship. And it literally just took me back to my childhood. And I couldn't do nothing but think, when we would get in trouble, one thing my mother would do is, and I always thought of it with me and Elder Scott. Mama would do this thing where she would do either, okay, so you did this wrong. Either you're going to get a whooping or you're going to get punishment. Which one you want? Now, this is the difference between me and Elder Scott. Elder Scott is older than me, right? So, of course, he's wiser. Elder Scott always chose the whooping. Me, I was like, I'm not getting no whooping. I'm going to choose the punishment. He crazy. I don't know what's wrong with him. But as I got older, I didn't realize that the punishment was worse because, one, I don't know when the punishment going to be over. I don't know what all entails the punishment. But Elder Scott was in that sense, was wiser than me because Elder Scott knew that once I get the whooping, I'm done. I got my whooping. Now it's it. I wasn't seeing that. I just didn't want to get punished. And that just came to mind when Yahweh told him, choose your punishment, basically. And it also made me think, how many of us we wish that we could choose our trials and tribulations. We wish that Yahweh would come to us and be like, okay, you gonna go through, but you can choose. I 100% agree that all of us would choose the lightest thing. And that's in my mind thinking the punishment was the lightest thing. But I didn't know that was really a test. As I got older, and then when I was thinking, I'm like, man, that was dang near a test. Because the older I got, Mama didn't present that to us no more. Mama knew I hated the whooping, so I'm getting a whooping. And then she knew Elder Scott hated the punishment, so Elder Scott was the punishment man. Became famous for having punishment. So in this, that example is literally the same thing that Yahweh is presenting to David here. So he said, I'm going to let you choose 3 alternatives. It says, the 11th verse says, so Gad came to David and said to him, this is what Yahweh says, choose for yourself either 3 years of famine, 3 moons to be defeated by your enemies with their swords overtaking you, or else for 3 days with the sword of Yahweh, the plague in the land, with the Malach, the angel of Yahweh, destroying throughout all the territory of Israel. Decide now what answer I should take back to him who sent me. That decide now stuck out to me because it was like, I'm not finna let you think about it. Decide now. Yahweh sent me now. I'm not gonna present you the alternatives and then leave and then come back and see what you say. He said, decide now. And that's also a way of Yahweh testing our wisdom as well, because we got to be quick. Sometimes you got to be quick on your feet. You're going to be presented with situations where you don't have time to think about it. It's you decide now. When you want to backslide, decide now. Are you going to backslide or am I going to stand firm? And sometimes as I said, when David was incited, when them things become tempting, you don't have time to think. It's looking fun. It's looking like it feel good to them people. Them people are having fun. So you don't have time to think about what you're gonna do. It says decide now. Decide now what answer I should take back to him. So I wrote down here, I said, Yahweh wanted Gad to go back to David with 3 different punishments, and David had to choose which would take place. And then I wrote down, wouldn't it be nice if we could pick and choose what trial or tribulation we could go through? And I'm sure that every single one of us would choose something light or something that would not affect us too much. And that also came to mind. I don't know if y'all ever grew up. It was more of a grandparents thing would do this. When y'all ever had a grandparent or somebody go tell you go pick a switch outside? Yeah. When I was told to go pick a switch, I'm going to pick a twig. I'm going to pick something that is going to break as soon as it hit me. But if you had the right grandparent or the right parent, they're going to be like, that's not good enough. I guess I got to go pick it. And they would trust you enough to say, I'm going to trust you. Go pick a good one. Yeah. So you don't want to, after a while, once you didn't have so many choices of going to pick your switch, you done got in trouble so many times, okay, I can't go pick a twig because she going to get even madder and she might come back with a branch. So I need to choose one that's going to hurt, but it ain't going to be too bad. So just think of it in this aspect of how fatherly Yahweh is being to David at this point when he's letting him choose what punishment. I put, well, David is no different. Little did he know that this was also a test from Yahweh. Yahweh wanted to reveal what David's heart and his wisdom would show by determining what was he going to pick. Was he going to pick the famine, the 3 years of famine, the 3 moons to be defeated by his enemies and being overtaken, or the 3 days with the sword of Yahweh? So I just broke down what each one represented: the famine, the enemies overtaken, and the plague. So what David had to think about in his mind with choosing them. So with the famine, some would surely perish in Israel, but the wealthy and those who had resources, they could survive it. However, it would leave Israel vulnerable and having to rely on foreign nations for help. So those wealthy and the rich and the people who had things, the famine really wouldn't affect them too much, And then it will also leave Israel vulnerable because the poor in Israel would have to go to other nations and rely on them for help. So David had to think about that. The second punishment, defeated by your enemies. The majority of the soldiers would perish and would also make all of Israel vulnerable to foreign nations, and they would be infiltrated. So with that one, the majority of the soldiers that were in Israel would lose their lives. However, it would still be a bunch more of Israel that would still be there. It would mainly be the soldiers that would perish. And also, other nations would think in their minds how weak the nation of Israel looks now. They're being defeated. Whatever luck they had, now it's running out. So that would leave them even more vulnerable to people. And the third punishment, which was the plague. This would also cause some in Israel to perish. However, all of Israel would be subjected to this punishment, the rich and the poor. So with the plague, there would be no nothing. Everybody is subject to this. David's people, the rich, the poor, the soldiers, everybody has a chance of getting caught by this plague and losing their life. So the 13th verse says, this is David's reply back to Gad after those three choices. It says, David said to Gad, I am in great distress. Let me fall into the hands of Yahweh, for his mercies are very great, but do not let me fall into the hands of men. So this is where I would say that David, it was such a twofold with this response, because partially David was being selfish, and partially it was like he was kind of using Yahweh. If we all remember with the story with Bathsheba, when Yahweh told David that I'm going to kill that son that you bore with Bathsheba. And what did David go do? It said that David went and fasted. It said that he slept on the floor. He didn't eat. He didn't want to talk to nobody. And then it said that when the child had died, David got up, washed himself, and his people came to him and was like, when the child was alive, why was you acting like that? But now that the child is dead, you up and moving. And this David responding was saying, well, I thought if I did that, Yahweh would be merciful on me. This is almost in the same sense, because now David is choosing to fall into the hands of Yahweh, because it said Yahweh's mercies are great. And one thing that I was thinking is, I don't think I want to test Yahweh like that. I don't think I want to, if I'm presented with something like that, granted, I get where David was coming from, where he's like, I don't want the people to suffer. And also, he's kind of still operating in pride in this sense, because he said, don't let me fall into the hands of the enemies. At this point, he's still not even acknowledging Israel. This is still all about David. The numbering was all about David. Don't let me fall into the hands of the enemy. It's all about David. So Yahweh's noticing this. Remember, this is a test. So he's going to choose the plague from Yahweh, not knowing the things that Yahweh really can do. The 14th verse says, so Yahweh sent the plague upon Israel, and 70,000 men of Israel died. 70,000 men within 3 days were perished due to the plague that David he asked for. True, this is the punishment that he asked for. And it really just kind of shows how at this point he was sorry. Remember, because he did apologize, but even in his apology, he didn't apologize for all of Israel. He just apologized for himself. Forgive me, Yahweh, for what I did. But leaders should know how important their role just really is. It engulfs everybody. Remember when Solomon built the kingdom, when he first built the first temple, it said that Solomon went into the temple and he prayed the prayer for all of Israel. He didn't go in there and pray for himself. He prayed for all of Israel's sins, and that if Israel went and sinned, Yahweh, please bring them back in. Allow them to fall back into your court, oh Yahweh. David hadn't done this yet. David was still thinking David. It says, so Yahweh sent the plague upon Israel, and 70,000 men of Israel died. Verse 15, Yahweh sent the Malach, an angel, to Jerusalem to destroy it. But as he was destroying, Yahweh looked upon it and relented of the severity of his punishment and had mercy. So, remember I said it was like a twofold to what David was doing. Even though he did choose this decision out of his pride, he did have a point that I would rather fall under Yahweh's mercy, because I don't know what men gonna do. If I fall into the prayer, if we fall out of this, Bishop always has a saying, if I'm gonna fall, let me fall in the house, because I'm surrounded by people who gonna pick me up. But if I fall out there, man, people like to kick you when you down. People like to incite you to get out there. Then when you get out there, it's your fault. Who told you to do that? You did it, not me. So David was right in this sense, that Yahweh's mercy is better than depending on these people's mercy. And as we can see in this 15th verse, it said that Yahweh did look upon it, the severity of his punishment. So you know it had to be intense for even Yahweh, the one who's doing the punishment, to be like, okay. And I just got to go back to being as a child. I can't think of one time when I was getting in trouble that the one who was getting me was feeling bad for me. So there you go. That's depending on the mercies of the men and not depending on the mercy of Yahweh. Yahweh here had mercy. It says the severity of the punishment, and he had mercy. He said to the angel who was destroying, "It is enough. Withdraw your hand." And the angel of Yahweh was at the threshing floor of Ornan the Jebusite. So I'm just going to put a pin right there, and I'm going to pick up next time. Is there any questions or comments so far on the message this morning talking about bewaring of Satan's glory? Before I end, I just want all of us to just be wary and just be careful that we don't fall prey to those things that look good or things that we're so dependent on what it looks like in front of our eyes. Because when we do that, we end up like David. David was dependent on the numbers that he had, and so much so that he was no longer dependent on Yahweh. The same man that said, "I'm the apple of Yahweh's eye," he's no longer thinking about that. He's thinking about the numbers, how strong is the army. So instead of putting the faith in Yahweh, David's now thinking that the more people I have, the more battles I'm going to win. And we just need to realize that that's just impossible. The statement that says it's strength in numbers does not apply to us, the people of Yahweh. Because we know in this mighty kingdom, we done made mighty, all under the leadership of our leader, we done made a mighty, mighty works. The word itself being prevailed just from what we hear and being taught by our leader, not by a lot of people. And that made me think, I don't know how well the word could get, the true word from Yahweh could get out if so many people had that word. And remember that the word said that there was only a remnant of people. It said right here 1,100,000 men capable of drawing the sword. But that don't mean that all of these men were saved either. Not all of these men were under the direct unction of Yahweh or even David. Because remember, some of these men were part of the nation, the enemy nations that David went in and took them and held them as slaves. So I'm going to hold you slave and you're going to fight for me. So not all of these men were sold out for Yahweh's army. So we just need to be careful and make sure that we don't fall prey to the mercy, to the glory and what the excellencies look like. And one key thing to know that between Satan's glory and Yahweh's glory is if it feel like that you doing it, or if it feel like if you get to a point where if I don't have this, I'm nothing, or I can't do this, you should know that you are operating under the glory of Satan and not Yahweh. Because those words should never, ever even, those thoughts should never even come across. If Yahweh if we stand up and say it, Yahweh is the head of my life, how can I say if I don't have this? And I hear a lot of people saying, if I just get this, then I'll be happy. How do we think we're going to get blessed like that? How are you possibly going to get a blessing if you need to receive something in order to be this way? When Yahweh said that he made all things good and very good from the beginning. So we should, and it also said to be in whatever spirit you in, be content. So if I know that I'm down, if I'm in a state where I'm just not feeling the best, be content. But be content in who Yahweh is and know that Yahweh is the only one capable of bringing me out. If there are no questions, comments, man, service should be starting here in about 15 minutes or so, 15 minutes or less. Please, the Cash App should be on the screen. Please sow into the ministry. And shalom.